You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankmen. On Saturday night, more than 100 people who live around Aurora Avenue North in Seattle marched to protest gun violence in their neighborhood. I went to observe the demonstration, which was organized to call attention to the escalating number of shootings neighbors and law enforcement say are related to sex trafficking in the Aurora corridor. One person named Jake says multiple bullets hit his home last month near where his 6-week-old baby slept.
We march to stop criminal violence in our neighborhood. It should be straightforward.
In desperation, some neighbors recently took matters into their own hands and put up makeshift street barriers to try to stop people from driving through the neighborhoods. The city council has been working on legislation that would allow the city to close off streets at the discretion of the chief of police. The hope is that would help curb violence. But on Saturday, neighbors expressed anger that the city isn't doing more to stop shootings and to help the victims of sex trafficking.
I just think we need the city to do their job.
Yeah. So what's happening on Aurora and what's being done to fix it? We'll hear from different voices today, including someone with lived experience as a sex worker. We'll also hear from an outreach organization that is trying to stop sex trafficking. One thing you'll hear our guests touch on today is the SOAP, or Stay Out of Areas of Prostitution and Prostitution Loitering laws that were reinstated by the Seattle City Council in 2024. These are statutes the current Seattle City Attorney, Erica Evans, says are ineffective and racially biased, and she promised during her campaign to not enforce them. However, sex trafficking and purchasing of sex remain illegal in Seattle. We're not going to get to the bottom of the debate over these laws today on the show, but I spoke with the city attorney at the march on Saturday. Evans was there listening to North Seattle neighbors, and she told me she was open to coming on the show to talk further, maybe later this week. We'll keep you updated on that. First, today, we're going to start with another law enforcement perspective. Alex Voorhees is a senior deputy prosecuting attorney for King County. Alex, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Libby.
So can you first kind of introduce us to what the King County Prosecutor's Office work looks like on Aurora Avenue?
Sure. It's kind of widespread. We have different units in our office that tackle different problems associated with what's going on Aurora. I am the prosecutor in our office that's assigned to handle our human trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation cases that happen in the north end of the county, many of which have ties to Aurora. Cases from other parts of the county also have ties to Aurora. Often we find that our victims aren't living necessarily in the city of Seattle. They're living in surrounding areas and being brought to Aurora to engage in work. So it also sort of spans countywide. We also have units in our office that deal with organized retail theft, burglaries, those sorts of felony level offenses, as well as a violent crimes unit that works on assaults, robberies, drive-by shootings, and firearms related cases. I've had the opportunity to work in that unit as well as our homicide unit, so I'm pretty well versed in what goes on across the office with the investigation of these cases.
Is the recent violence from your perspective related to sex trafficking, or is there either gang violence or other types of issues happening there along Aurora?
Well, they're all sort of not one and the same. Our traffickers are often involved in criminal gang activity. There's often drug dealing involved, as well as the human trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. So it's the trifecta. It's kind of all of those things together that lead to really heated environments that do often result in, gun battles and violence. I've seen cases where pimps and traffickers are trying to run over girls that are working. They shoot at the girls. They shoot at each other. My office also handles cases involving rapes, robberies, and assaults of commercial sex workers. I feel like my caseload, at least right now, anecdotally, has had an uptick of really violent assaultive behavior against sex workers at the hands of buyers as well. And so it's just sort of a powder keg of really violent activity up there right now.
Your boss, Lisa Mannion, the King County prosecutor, has said that she's working to get the legislature to raise the penalties for purchasing sex. Is that something you can talk to? Is that too much of a political topic for your area, or what is your office asking for basically from the legislature?
Sure. What our office proposed was House Bill 2526 that made it out of the Public Safety Committee last year, but didn't make it through appropriations. And the version that made it out of the committee was incredibly watered down. We are asking that, so right now it is a simple misdemeanor to purchase sex in the state of Washington. We are asking or proposing that the legislature make it a Class C felony, equivalent to the crime of promoting prostitution in the second degree, which is the advancing or profiting from prostitution without threat, force, or violence. It would also give us the ability to double the fines and fees associated with the crime. And while the legislature has backed off fines and fees in a number of areas because people that are involved in criminal activity often can't afford to pay those fines and fees, this is the one area where that's not necessarily the case. We have rich people committing a crime. And the fines and fees associated with offenses that are related to human trafficking and the promotion of prostitution go into a fund that are paid back to the cities or the counties where the cases originate to go to survivors of human trafficking, to help NGOs fund shelter beds, to provide basic care, to provide hotel rooms for women who are just trying to escape and need a safe place to be for a night. Those types of services, as well as trauma-informed, survivor-led counseling and therapeutic services. And also with some of the offenses, some of the money goes to law enforcement to continue work with respect to investigating crimes related to human trafficking. But specifically with the buyer bill, we have said that all of the money, all of the fines and fees should go to survivor services.
Let me ask you about some of the pushback I've seen from people who advocate for decriminalizing voluntary sex work. So people who say that we should be focused on, yes, sex trafficking as a crime, but there is a danger in stigmatizing or going after what some people say is, a path that they think should be decriminalized, and that is sex work where a person is choosing the profession and is using their bodily autonomy and, going into that with their full choice. What do you think about that pushback? Like, is there a way to go after sex trafficking and not sex work overall? What is your opinion about that?
It's a hard question, and it's one that comes up. I do believe that there are people in society that do choose this work. I think that it is a minority, a very small minority of the individuals that are involved in commercial sex work. And many of the individuals that go on to work consensually later on have often been introduced to the life as a child or at a younger stage in life. And so whether or not
when they couldn't choose,
when they couldn't choose,
exploited.
Yeah. And the legislation that we're talking about with respect to buyers doesn't target individuals that are women or girls or people that are engaged in, I can't say girls because children, juveniles cannot consent to engage in commercial sex work, but adults who want to offer commercial sexual services. This bill does not criminalize them. This bill simply says that the purchasers of sex are the ones that this bill is targeting, not the individuals that are consensually engaging in commercial sex work. There's outright decriminalization. There's another sort of hybrid that is it's had a lot of different names, the Nordic model, the Scandinavian model, the equity model, the survivor model. They're all kind of one and the same. We've found that in places that have gone with straight decriminalization, it actually leads to an influx of buyers and an influx of individuals being trafficked. We decriminalized for juveniles in Washington state, so you can't charge a child with the crime of prostitution in Washington state. That came with, we were supposed to get receiving centers on either side of the mountains so that law enforcement, instead of taking a kid to juvenile detention, would have a safe place with trauma-informed services available to take a child to 24/7, and they don't exist.
One of them closed in Eastern Washington, and then one of them was never materialized on the west side of the state.
We've never had one on the west side of the state.
That must be incredibly frustrating for somebody like you who does this work.
I used to have detectives drive kids from Kent or Seattle to Spokane and drop them off at this facility. And that takes law enforcement. Like, we know we have a problem with not enough officers to do the work, right? And we're having detectives we were having detectives that fleeting moment when we had a receiving center on the east side of the mountains, 6 hours or however many hours round trip to go take a kid so that they could be somewhere safe. So neither of those have ever come to fruition. We don't have robust services in place the way the Scandinavian countries do. We don't have free education and job training the way, many of the European countries that have gone with this full Scandinavian or survivor model. And we are also one of 50 contiguous states, right? So if we were to decrim or make prostitution not a crime, I think that would lead to an influx of people coming to Washington state being trafficked. We've seen it through cases that I've worked with juvenile victims, where one of the selling points for traffickers now is it's not even a crime for you to do this, right? So it's hard. I never want to infringe on someone's lived experience or their choices to engage in this work if that's what they really want to do. But at the same time, the disproportionate number of people involved in this are not doing it so willingly. So to sort of placate to a very small subset of sex workers as opposed to where the bigger problem is and the sex work that leads to problems in our communities like gun violence and drug dealing and all of the associated crime that goes along with it. So it's a tough, it's hard. I don't want to tell someone that they can't do what they want to do for a living. But the legislation that we've proposed certainly doesn't do that.
Alex Voorhees, I really appreciate the time that you took to kind of explain what's happening here, talk about your work and also, everything else, the services and lack of services that are associated with the situation on Aurora. Senior Deputy Prosecuting Attorney for the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're listening to Soundside on KUOW. And we wanted to hear more about the efforts to stop trafficking here in Washington. To help with that, we're going to talk now with Safe in Washington. It's an alliance of nonprofits, law enforcement, businesses, and other groups that are working to stop trafficking in the state. Audrey Bedke is the executive director of Safe in Washington. Thank you for being here, Audrey.
Happy to be here.
What would you say to people and neighbors, for example, who are frustrated at the escalating violence that's related to the sex trafficking and related to turf wars and things like that? What do you think about when you see the fact that neighbors marched over the weekend, things like that?
I appreciate that neighbors are standing up to say, not in our community. In fact, I almost wish that everyone had this front row seat to what's going on so that there would be more people standing up saying, not in our community. I also really appreciate that neighbors have a sense of humanity and see that the women that are being exploited are also being harmed. I've had neighbors describe seeing women have cars drive over them. I've had neighbors describe seeing pimps shoot at the girls. And they have this recognition that the people who are selling sexual services, by and large, are being trafficked and are being exploited and harmed themselves. And so they aren't holding this against the women, which I really appreciate, but instead calling for this accountability against the buyers and the traffickers. And I would say that our city should be able to do better. And there seems to be this interest to be able to do something, and yet we keep going back to doing nothing. And one example is neighbors fought to have the soap orders put into place. And survivors and service providers and law enforcement and many people came together to say, yes, let's absolutely arrest people who are loitering for the purposes of prostitution, but let's not arrest the girls. Let's not arrest the women. Let's arrest the people who are buying and coordinating the sales. And this is huge because in order to create a criminal case against traffickers, it takes a lot of resources. To be able to go after buyers also takes resources. And to be able to have a reason to arrest and deter people from coming and doing business in the neighborhood, just for the sake of loitering or because they are loitering, would be a benefit to the entire community. And I would love to see that happen. But instead, what happened is people fought to have this put in place. It was put into place, and then no prosecutions have come from it. And so what's the point of actually doing anything about it? So there's these attempts to do something, and then nothing happens.
If the prostitution loitering law is enforced, not the SOAP order, which is focused on the people trafficking, who are, a judge can order them to stay out of an area. But if the prostitution loitering law is enforced, doesn't that mean sending some of these girls and women to jail? I mean, the underage minors can't be arrested anymore for prostitution in Washington state. But for the women who are in the sex trade, could that not be, harmful for them? Like they get a loss of income, they have to, use resources to bail out, things like that.
Yes. Ideally, women would not be arrested, or to be more accurate, the people who are selling sex would not be arrested. But this also does have an unintentional consequence, which is by not arresting and not doing anything with the people who are selling sex, we're telling traffickers this is a great place to do business. Because if a trafficker is making a profit off of someone who's walking on Aurora and they go to jail and they're out for a week, then the trafficker is losing money. But right now, they aren't being arrested. They're staying on the streets. And so profit is rolling in. And not only that, but Aurora is becoming known as a great place to do trafficking business. There have been different videos I've seen on TikTok, different pimps that I've heard from on the streets that have said, this is the place to come to sell women and girls, because the police aren't going to do anything about it, and your profits can roll in and day out. Now, ideally, the women would have an intervention. So law enforcement might step in, take them out of the situation, and they be able to meet with service providers who could provide services and options for them to be able to choose from. We've done this in the past. It's worked remarkably well. I know at least a handful of women who, because of sting operations, made changes in their lives. And they weren't arrested, they weren't prosecuted, none of that happened, but they did get the intervention and the opportunity to do something different. And it did make a difference to the traffickers, who then lost their profits for that day, and for some of them even longer.
SOAP and the prostitution loitering laws, these are things that I've heard from neighbors that they really want to see enacted. And we're going to be talking about that more this coming week, that debate over the effectiveness of those laws. What about other solutions here? I mean, you have all kinds of members in your organization, member groups. Are there other types of outreach efforts, systemic change type things that you've heard from your members that could be effective in the long run?
Yes, there need to be resources available for people who want to exit. And right now, if an adult wants to exit, there are emergency beds for single women, but those beds are often full. There are no beds that are for minors, for young girls and boys that are being exploited. On Aurora, it is primarily girls, and there are no beds for them to go to. And so even if they want to exit, typically a person is leaving with only the clothes on their back, and to have nowhere to go to sleep makes me think of a client of mine who had said, I would rather stay at a John's house where I know that I'm going to be raped than have to sleep at a bus stop where it's probably going to happen and I won't get money from it anyway.
What do you say to the idea that there is an argument to decriminalize and in the long run make it so that these women don't have to turn to traffickers for protection? They can, be out in the open and plying their trade. What do you say to that argument about decriminalization?
I would love for there to be more safety for the people who are selling sex. And I understand that by increasing or by decreasing penalties, then people who are engaged in the sex trade can sell for higher amounts and negotiate for safer practices. The problem is that if we decriminalize, there's also a large number of men who would purchase sex who currently don't because there are laws in place. And so if we increase the number of men that are purchasing sex, then business models show there needs to be an increase of supply. And there are not enough willing participants raising their hands to say, I want to sell sex, that traffickers have an economic opportunity to step in, recruit, and exploit people so that they can profit. So decriminalizing might provide more safety for people who have the agency to negotiate prices, negotiate safety, and do something different with their lives. But for the people who are only entering this because someone else saw an economic opportunity, decriminalizing is going to increase the number of victims that we have. And once a person is involved, it's incredibly difficult to get out.
Audrey Bedke, Executive Director for SAFE in Washington. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is Sound Aside. I'm Libby Dankman, and we're talking about the recent gun violence on Aurora Avenue and its connection to sex work and sex trafficking in the area. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to hear from somebody who's working on the ground with sex workers in the area about what the past few weeks have been like for them. That's after this on KUOW. And we're back with more Sound Aside. I'm Libby Dankman. Neighbors near Aurora Avenue North have been sounding the alarm about escalating gun violence connected to sex work and sex trafficking. We're hoping today to get a scope of the problems and their underlying causes. So far, we've heard from a prosecutor with King County and the executive director of an alliance that's fighting trafficking in Washington. Now we're going to get some more perspective on what it's like for sex workers on Aurora at this moment. We're turning now to the Greenlight Project. It's a mutual aid group that provides harm reduction supplies, services, and support to street-based sex workers. The people providing outreach are often current or former sex workers themselves. And I'm joined now by Amber at the Greenlight Project, who has asked us to only use their first name for safety purposes. Hi, Amber. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to y'all.
We've heard from some sources, law enforcement especially, that the life of somebody doing street work, street sex work on Aurora involves exploitation and danger, and it's a really tough life. And I wonder if you can talk to me about, is that the experience of the people that you serve? What does it look like? What does that work look like when we're talking about Aurora specifically?
I think that that's sometimes accurate and sometimes not accurate. The law enforcement perspective is that everyone who engages in street-based sex work is a victim and is being trafficked and abused. And there's nuance to it. There are people that choose to engage in sex work, and there are people that choose to engage in street-based sex work. And then there are people that are being, the definition of trafficking, is coercion, fraud, and force. And so we want to support people with whatever choices they make and respect their agency and autonomy. We think that sex work is work. And that sex workers deserve care and resources regardless of whether they are being coerced and forced to do sex work or whether they are making that choice and saying, this is what's best for my life right now.
So the neighbors that we've been talking about so far today, who are marching and really trying to call attention to the violence that's been happening for years, but has seemed to have an uptick recently. They're calling for action. They want to see, for example, soap and soda laws enforced more, the stay out of areas of prostitution laws enforced. Some of them have said they want to see the prostitution loitering laws enforced. Now, most of the neighbors that I hear from are really clear where they're saying they don't want to be punitive towards the sex workers, and mostly because they see the sex workers as victims in this situation. And I just wonder, what are your reflections about kind of the way the conversation has been taking shape when it comes to the recent uptick in gun violence around Aurora Avenue? What are your reflections on that?
I live near Aurora Avenue, just a few blocks away. And
so you're a neighbor too.
I'm in the neighborhood. Actually, most of our volunteers are in the neighborhood. There's quite a few that live just within a few blocks of Aurora. And then there's a few that live further out. That's part of the mutual aid part, is this is literally our city and our streets and our community that we're trying to help. So I really empathize and understand how scared people are, especially, families with children and people that live and work in this neighborhood. Obviously no one wants gun violence here. But I think that a carceral approach and a punitive approach is a Band-Aid solution, right? We can arrest everyone and put them all in jail, and then other people will come and be here, and or the same people that were in jail will get out and be back out here. If someone is a sex worker and they witness a violent crime, or they are the victim of a violent crime, they are less likely to report it because they are afraid of getting arrested themselves, or afraid of losing their children, or afraid of maybe their landlord finds out about the situation and they lose their housing. You can't tell someone to stop working and stop making a living when they have rent to pay and children to feed. They need another choice.
The current environment is, like you said, it can be scary for neighbors. It is scary for neighbors. And many of them, when they see people working, sex workers on Aurora, they're getting frustrated. I guess, what do you want them to keep in mind? People who do believe that there is a way that the legal system can solve this, maybe overnight or in a quicker way. What do you hope that they keep in mind?
I would hope that they see the humanity in the sex workers, and I would hope that they keep in mind that the people that are working on the street are not the enemy. They're not the ones shooting the guns. They're oftentimes the victims themselves. When a lot of these shootings happen, it's oftentimes very late at night or very early in the morning, when the people that are most likely to be out on the street and caught in the crossfire are the street-based sex workers. And they're just as scared when these shootings happen as anyone else in the neighborhood, whether they're the intended or unintended targets of gun violence. The finger pointing and the blaming of the sex workers themselves is misplaced. Participants have told us that they are going to stay with family in another city because they're scared to be on the street with all the shootings happening. Participants have told us that someone they know got shot in the leg and had to have surgery. So their safety and their lives are also on the line here. And they don't want gun violence any more than the people living in the neighborhood do.
Again, you're a neighbor. You understand the neighborhood is scared about the gun violence. Is there anything else that you think people are missing about this conversation, and what safety could look like, what public safety here could look like, or what they should know about this, what's happening on Aurora?
The long-term solution is not easy. The long-term solution is to provide people with the things they need. And the top three things that participants, that sex workers on Aurora ask us for help with are domestic violence shelters, low-income housing, homeless shelters in general, and food. We give out a lot of food and snacks, probably more food and snacks than we give out condoms and pepper spray. We see an increase in the amount of people that are working on the street right before rent is due. So, the domestic violence shelters, when someone's trying to leave an abusive or coercive relationship, are full. I can call every single one, and there's a wait list to get her into any of those places. The low-income housing, there's not enough of it to go around. They do lotteries, people are on wait lists for years. Seattle is an unaffordable place to live. And the people that are doing sex work, a lot of them live here. This is their home too. Their kids go to school here. And so, if we could make a way for those people to be stably housed and be able to have enough food for their family, they might be able to make other choices if they wanted to stop doing sex work or if they wanted to do some other type of sex work that is safer. But they're going to do what they have to do to survive. And so the long-term answer requires a lot of resources and funding and city planning in order to get those people to be safer. And it's not an easy thing to do.
I really appreciate you, Amber. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. And we will keep covering this issue here on Soundside. If you have thoughts and you want to share them about Aurora Avenue North and what's going on there, email us at soundside@kuow.org, or you can leave us a voicemail at 206-221-3213, 206-221-3213. We'll be talking more in depth in the near future about the debate over specific laws and enforcement in Seattle, especially SOAP and the prostitution loitering statute. So stay tuned for more on that. Again, that email is soundside@kuow.org. Voicemail number 206-221-3213. Be sure to leave your first name and where you're from if you'd like to hear your response on air. Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at kuow.org or on your favorite podcast app.